And as we have more people coming in, feel free to add your organization to your name so we all know who you are. Just click on the three dots on your little square and you'll see rename, and you can change your name and add the name of your organization. And we'll wait a couple minutes so that everybody can get in and get situated. But thank you all for being here early in the morning on a cozy December. I don't know how it is over there, but it's very like cloudy. Looks like it's going to start raining soon over here. I'm going to do a quick run through of the agenda. Hold on. All right. Do you all see the agenda? No. How about now? Great. Okay. So we only have a 15-minute break planned for these 3 hours. So just be sure to take care of yourself and do some jumping jacks if you need and snack if you need. But Hannah will give us an update. And then Martha Cruz is going to talk to us about the 1200C permit. Then we'll have Femke Freiberg and Kaylin Barter will talk to us about John Day Water transactions and funding opportunities. We'll then take a 15-minute break. And then we're each going to go through and every partner will tell us their one biggest accomplishment of 2023, and emphasis on the one because we have a lot to pack into these 3 hours. So we just want to stay on time. So just one big accomplishment, and we'll go run through that real quick, and then we'll wrap it up and talk about our next steps. So I'll hand it over. Oh, Hannah disappeared. But I'll hand it over to Hannah to give us a partnership update.
Yeah, sure. Do you mind putting the slides back on?
Absolutely.
And then, yep, there we go. Okay, all right. Well, thank you all for coming today. Like Marika said, we have a pretty packed schedule, so I'll be quick with my updates. We just finished our December TRT, so technical review team meeting for the FIP projects that got applied for this fall. And so you can see these are the 5 projects that got selected. Thank you to everyone who presented and who helped on the technical review team. So we have the Deerhorn Creek restoration. That one is through Trout Unlimited on the Middle Fork. Camp Creek Reach 1 is through the North Fork John Day Watershed Council. Middle Fork Planting Phase 4 is through the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. And then 2 in the Butte 30-mile geography, which is the lower 30-mile restoration design. That'll be on the BLM property on 30-mile through Gillum SWCD. And then the 2024-2026 30-mile Phase 3, which is in conjunction with ODFW and Gillum SWCD. So those are the 5 projects that got funded. Next one. And then just a quick recap. So these are our 2024 meeting dates. As you can see here, normally our February and December meetings are always virtual, right during the winter time. And then our May and September meetings will be in person, both with site visits, and we're still deciding where those meetings will be, and so more to come on those. If you guys haven't received any of the meeting invites that Marika sent out a couple of weeks ago, feel free to just email the JDVP coordinator at gmail.com with your email, and we can add you to the listserv so you can start getting those regular updates about when meetings are. And I think that's the last thing for my slide, but I will just quickly update. I think most people already know, but we are going to be putting in for a NOAA grant that's due next Tuesday. This will be mainly for capacity for soft funded partners within the partnership, and we'll be asking for capacity funding to participate in the partnership, and also project development funding. So kind of like the identify and select funding that I think most of you guys get from the tribes as well. So if you were on that email list that I originally sent out, we still are looking for some letters of support for that NOAA grant. If you could get those to me by tomorrow, that would be awesome. So we can, have a ton of letters of support for the grant. And I appreciate all of the people that have already given them to me. So just that quick update for the NOAA grant. And then also the Bella Vista funding, which is a private foundation fund, is coming around in February, and we will also be applying for that for additional capacity funds for the partnership. So two pretty big capacity grants for the partnership, and hopefully they get funded. And that is all.
Great, thanks, Hannah. Also, presenters, you should be able to share your screens, but just in case you have any issues, I'm going to put my email address into the chat and just let me know there are issues, and you can send me your presentations and I'll share. Also, everybody, just keep yourselves on mute. If you have a question, you can raise your hand or just unmute yourself, but I'll be checking the chat as we go. And so now we have Martha. I'll stop sharing, Martha, so you can share. Oh, you're on mute.
And I do apologize. I will pull up my presentation on my end really quick. I was not sure how that was going to work. But yeah, my name is Martha Cruz. I'm with the Department of Environmental Quality. Some of you might have already worked with me before. I know I've been working with Hannah for a while on a 1200C project in the John Day Basin. I did want to let everybody know that this outreach is separate from a lot of my coworkers in the TMDL program. So just wanted to make that clear before starting here, just since I know you'll probably be hearing from more people with DEQ, but the TMDL folks are actually a little bit different from what I'm doing here today. So I'm not technically minded, so I'm trying to figure out how to actually make this thing work.
You should see this share screen button at the bottom. It's green.
Yeah, I'm having trouble with making the PowerPoint. So
okay.
It's been a little bit since I've messed with all this stuff, and I meant to be in the office today and unfortunately ran into some problems.
Well,
so
take your time, no pressure.
Oh, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to leave it not in the full presentation mode because I want to switch between our permit that's online, and then you can hopefully get a better idea of what we're looking for. So essentially the 1200C permit, if you've heard of it before, this is the general construction stormwater permit that we have. It's kind of a template that's based on EPA, their general permit. We administrate their program, and so there's a lot of different states that have their own version of this. And so if you've dealt in Washington or California, you might have seen something similar, but not exactly the same. In general, this is for areas that are above the high water mark that are over 1 acre. But occasionally the permit will actually kick in for those projects that are less than 1 acre of disturbance and above the high water mark. So I know a lot of these restoration projects, they have to get the 401, 404, and I know, again, that might be changing as well. But this is for specifically work that's above the high water mark that has the potential to cause pollution to surface waters of the state. So that right there, that's just pulled from the permit for what that's just pulled from the front page of the permit, what applies to your project. The one thing I want to draw your attention to is D there, and that's where any project where it's less than 1 acre can still get pulled into requiring this permit. just so you guys know, there was nobody in my position for about 6 years. And so a lot of the times either people weren't being made aware of this requirement, or they were maybe misinformed, just because traditionally people only say over an acre of disturbance. Well, the thing that was being left out of a lot of those is that the acre of disturbance includes not only what is planned to be disturbed, but then also staging areas, access roads, stockpiling, stuff like that. So there's a lot of projects where you have to take that into account as well, even if it's not on site. So for example, if a stockpile is, they haven't defined how far away a stockpile area would be, but if it wasn't even like a quarter mile, half a mile, it would still need to be listed on the erosion sediment control plan, which we'll get to in a bit. And then also that could trigger the 1200C. So then the other section is potential to discharge the surface water of the state. Surface waters of the state in DEQ is defined extremely broadly. So that will include wetlands, that will include your even a certain ephemeral streams it can include. So just be aware that our definition of surface waters isn't just limited to the 401, 404 definition. So, and then really quick, the other thing that I wanted to let you guys know is that this permit doesn't authorize in-water work. It specifically says that this permit can't cover it. So if we're running into a situation where there would be a 401, 404 required, and we don't have that certification yet, we can't issue the 1200C permit. And that's going to become a little bit more challenging, I know, with the more limited definition of what is considered waters of the US, just because there's a lot of times now where they would be considered surface waters of the state, so this permit wouldn't authorize in-water work. At the same time, a 401, 404 isn't being triggered. So that's still something the department's working through at this time. But if you have questions, feel free to come to me and I can forward those on. I just want to make sure that everybody is aware. So I know for the most part, when everybody has questions for me, if they need to reach out, it's going to be like, hey, does our project actually trigger this permit? There's a good chance it will for a lot of those projects, even if it wasn't something that a lot of places were being made aware of before. So, so just going to run through how to apply really quickly. Everything is moving to online, and it's called our online system, which is called Your DEQ Online. If you hear YDO, that's what we're all talking about. You know, we love our acronyms over here, and so unfortunately we use them a bit too much. The biggest problem I've seen people run into with this is that they have to create a RO account, which is the person who's basically the signatory authority. And that can take a little bit. They have recently, I just found this out, they recently changed their process so that if there was any problems getting the RO account certified in a timely manner, because every now and then it fails, and then they have to require you to send in the paper version, which can take a week or so. They've sent out an email so that people can send their RO account to that email and get it registered a lot sooner if for some reason this verification system isn't working. But otherwise, normally it takes like a day or two to get the RO account. Longest I've seen it take is about 2 weeks. So just want to make people aware of that. And then the RO account is the person who will be signing everything, but they don't have to do everything. They can assign people like the subcontractor, they can assign consultants basically to upload materials for them. Other thing I'll say about the RO account, it doesn't necessarily have to be the all it says is has to be a person who's in charge of directing the work. We are kind of moving towards trying to make sure that, you know, the person who obtains the permit is the person who's going to be with the project throughout the duration of the project. And I know that can create some problems with your guys' projects, because there's the subcontractors who are actually doing the work. They're in charge, and they're there every day. Whereas your projects you might not be there every single day. So I do know that there is a lot of back and forth about who then should be the RO, and that's something I'm, willing to discuss with you guys. In general, we would actually probably prefer it to be you guys who hold the permit, since you're kind of like holding more of the strings, but I understand how that can make things complicated as well. So feel free, that's open for discussion, but I wanted to throw that out there. The other thing that's required, then this is the other challenging big item that's required for this permit, is the sediment erosion control plan. A lot of your projects already have a lot of the components in that would be required for a sediment erosion control plan in there. And so there's a lot of those plan sets that can be reused. We definitely not normally need some additional info on those plan sets in order for them to be approved. But I don't want people to think that they have to go and hire their consultant and make an entirely new plan set. Edits normally are necessarily, but I've only run into a few projects where we need an entire erosion and sediment control plan. And the two things that also can add a lot of time to this is the Russell 2 and doing the Russell 2 calculations for the natural buffer zone. And then those sites, if they're over on 20 acres of disturbance, not 20 acres of the site, but 20 acres of disturbance, those require an engineering signature. So just going to pop through your DEQ online really quick. The link is everything should be found. You should be able to find everything online. Your DEQ online has a lot of different resources for just going through that entire page. And I will just pop over here and pull this up, assuming I can get my screen to cooperate with me. So this is your DEQ online. This is the main web page that we have. As you'll see, they have our 401 certification has moved online. Industrial and construction stormwater, that's where I am, that has moved online, and there should be user guides for all of these. So there's the establish your user guide account that has it's about every single one of those varies between being 10 pages long of those user guides, and I think one of them's like 143. Don't be alarmed, they're mostly screenshots, so they should walk you through step by step. Some of them, like ours, we were the first program to come online, so some of the little things might look a little bit different as you're navigating through, but for the most part, you should be able to still use these user guides in order to navigate through the online portal. And then we also have all these instructional guides after you've gotten your account for the individual permits. And I do highly recommend, if you need to, referring to those, just because a lot of the time as you're in YDO, the buttons aren't labeled and stuff isn't clearly labeled. You'll have to like hover your mouse over it, and sometimes it'll appear, sometimes it won't. So it's very helpful to refer to these user guides online, and all you need to do is Google your DEQ online, Oregon DEQ, something to that effect, and it should take you to this main page here. And this is a landing page for basically all the information that you would need. And then also, if you're still having trouble, you still need additional help, there's these webinars down here as well that you can refer to.
Martha, there are some questions in the chat.
Oh.
Rebecca wants to know if you can clarify if this is specific for direct surface or outfall discharge, or if any groundwater drainage pathway is part of the 1200C.
Can you restate that question?
Yeah. Can you clarify if this is specific for direct surface or outfall discharge, or if any groundwater drainage pathway is part of the 1200C?
This is for stormwater. So this would be your surface water discharge. If there's groundwater coming up and it's discharging a part of your project, is that what the question is?
Yeah, you can. Rebecca, do you want to speak to your question?
Yeah, I'm specifically thinking of some projects that have stormwater that infiltrate into groundwater. And when groundwater may interact with hyporheic flow, and just trying to understand that process.
Totally
Thanks.
understand. Yeah, no, and that you bring up a great question because as some people might know, there was a recent decision over in Hawaii. It specifically pertained to wastewater. And it basically said that wastewater that goes to ground has a connection to groundwater and then has a direct connection to surface water will require a permit. That decision was not applied to stormwater permits. So it was just specifically for wastewater. That's what they're still working on it up there, higher pay grade than me. But the last thing I was told is that if you have a stormwater that's going into the ground and coming into contact with groundwater under the ground that might have a direct connection, stormwater permit does not apply. However, if you have a site where the groundwater has come up, it's then exposed, it then counts as, even if during construction you had dug this out, and I actually have a situation like this over in Umatilla. It was groundwater, they dug it up, they exposed it, so that at that point it became surface water, and at that point, yes, the 1200C was technically triggered. But if it's just stormwater infiltrating into the ground and then meeting groundwater underneath the ground, even if it has a direct connection to a surface water nearby, it's still under the ground, so the 1200C wouldn't be connected. Now, I will say, it still might be triggering the 1200C, but it wouldn't be because it's coming into contact with groundwater. It's more likely because the groundwater is feeding a wetland there. And in that case, if we was determined there's a wetland here, then the 1200C would be triggered. Does that answer your question?
It gives me some more context to think about. So thanks.
Yeah, and that is a very difficult gray area, I won't lie. Or at least it's a little bit of a grayer area. So if you're running, it really comes down to the specific site. I have had a site where it was like, I think this might be triggered. No wetlands there, wasn't triggered. Having another site, they exposed the groundwater, and it was found to have direct connection to the nearby surface water. And 1200C would have been required in that case. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Are there any other questions in the chat? I'm sorry, I just can't see it right now.
Oh yeah, that's fine. Denise wanted to know if you could say a little more about the upcoming changes to 404/401 that you alluded to that may impact permit timeline.
I wish I could say more. I don't want to get into any too many specifics, just because although I work closely with our 401 and 404 program, I don't work in the 401 program, so I can't exactly speak to them. I will definitely leave Haley Teaches. She's now kind of like in charge of the 401. I'll definitely leave her contact information in the chat after I get done with the presentation. That way you guys can email her and contact her. The last I heard was, and I'm not sure how many people are aware of this, but the recent WOTUS decision, changing what's defined as the waters of the U.S. is no longer inconsistent with the waters of the state. They were still working through how they're going to handle that process. And so I anticipate it could cause some more delays. Last I had talked with them about this, though, was in September. So my information is 3 months old, and she's tentatively going to give us a presentation in about a week here to update us, but I'm still not sure that they've figured out exactly what they're going to do. As far as I know, they're still following the old process. So unfortunately, that's as much information as I have right now. But yeah, I'll leave Haley's information in the chat so you guys can get a hold of her. And I also, on that note, might as well mention that we had several people in our 404 program leave this past year. And so there's been a lot of turnover in that program. Some of your contacts might no longer be the correct person to reach out to. So just so you're aware. Are there any other questions?
Thanks. Well, just if the PowerPoint will be available, and yes, this whole meeting is recorded. We'll post to the John Day website, and we'll send out the presentations with the notes. But thanks, Martha. You can continue.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. And if anybody has questions, feel free to reach out. So after you've registered through your DEQ online, the next thing would be, of course, to complete the erosion and sediment control plan. I'm sorry, don't know how to make that go away.
I think we might have lost Martha. I think she paused on us. Hold on. Let's see if we can get a hold of her. Okay, stand by. Technical difficulty.
Sorry about that. My Zoom just decided to update at that one moment. So can you guys see my screen okay? Or wait, I have not shared my screen yet. Apologies about that. So the main part that's going to cause everybody probably a little bit of headache is going to be the sediment erosion control plan. As I was saying earlier, you can scrap the entire, you can scrap a lot of what is in your 401, 404 plans if they're required and apply them here, just because the 401, 404 tends to inform what I need. A lot of times the erosion and sediment control plan, what it's intended to do is to ensure that no additional sediment is entering surface waters of the state than what's allowed by the 401, 404. So I will pull up the 401, 404 plan sometimes on my side and just make sure that they're kind of consistent with the erosion and sediment control plan as long as those plans have been submitted. Sometimes I can't find them just because I'm still getting used to the system, and I will ask for the 401, 404 certification to make sure that I am being consistent with the plans that they have. But that's where on my side, that's pretty much where I'm coming from. I'm just trying to make sure there's no additional sediment being generated that would then flow to surface waters of the state. So there's a lot of stuff that's required in the sediment erosion control plan. And a lot of the times what you'll need to be referring to is this underline, the third underline here, erosion and sediment control plan parts 1 through 3 form. On the top of the form, it does say, please add this information to your sediment and erosion control plan. We actually don't want a separate version. We want it strictly added to the plan. Internet is being very slow right now. Can you guys see my screen okay?
Yeah, we see it.
Okay. I was a little bit worried there because I'm getting little notifications saying it's not working. So, but here's the sediment erosion control plan. This is pretty much the additional information that I'm looking for normally, like on the plan set itself. So as you'll see up here, it says these are the narrative forms must be required on the ESCP drawings. The reason we look at the drawings is and not just having a narrative, although the permit, as I'll point out a little bit later, there's a narrative notes and you can write up a narrative in addition to having the drawings, but a lot of the times the drawings are supposed to inform the notes and some of the notes inform the drawings as well. But what you'll want to do is actually refer to these here and add them to the plan set as you need to develop the erosion and sediment control plan. One of the big things we look for, and this will probably cause, this might cause some issues. I've had a lot of people ask questions, as an inspector. There's not a lot of certified inspectors in Eastern region. And when you're applying for the permit, it's going to ask who's your visual monitoring inspector. It actually requires that to be filled out. And I actually require this before the permits, on the ESCP, before the permit can be issued. Due to the fact that there are not as many certified inspectors in the area, I do have a lot of people contact the engineer being like, hey, can we list your engineer as being a certified inspector until we have somebody in our contractor group trained and hired to do this, and then send in a revision later. That's acceptable. We just have to have somebody listed there. And they have to follow one of these approved certifications. Most of the time it's the Cecil certification here. That's because there's a lot of different places that offer it online. There's a lot of different offerings. And then if you do have a Cecil certification, and you do get it recently, I do ask that you send in a copy, because although normally they keep their database updated, occasionally it's not completely updated. And so it's just best if you send in the certification. That way I can see it as well. Same with SciSec. I don't have the ability to search the first two databases or Rogue Valleys. So if you get either CSpec or Professional Stormwater Quality or Rogue Valley Sewer Services, that would be something you probably want to send in the certification for. That way I can just verify. A lot of the section is somewhat straightforward. Every now and then there might be some of these sections that don't make a lot of sense. If there's ever a question about it, feel free to ask. Again, the natural buffer zone is actually going to be the next section that would probably cause the most problems for people. And let me navigate to that. So Appendix B goes over.
It doesn't look like your screen is changing when you change the screen.
Okay, so it's not changing. You can't see like the website or anything.
No, well, we see, is it still erosion and sediment control plan, or did you change it to something else?
Oh, I changed it. So I was pulling up the I was changing not to the erosion and sediment control plan. I was changing to actually I pulled up the form online. So I'm probably sharing. Here, let's see. Can you see it now?
Yeah, now we see it. Thanks.
I apologize.
No, you're fine.
I just did all that talking and probably made no sense to people. But anyways, on our website, this is specifically for the 1200C. So if you Google 1200C and you need some additional information, this should be the first website that comes up. And this has everything in the little drop downs here. For example, the permit, a lot of the stuff you'll actually want to refer to is in these resources and forms section. And there's a lot of, as you saw on the main page, this is where those resources are located. So the erosion and sediment control plan form, that's what's going to inform a lot of your erosion and sediment control plan. And the stuff on this form is what we would need to be added to the plan set. It says ESCP drawings. Most of the time when we get these things there, as I was saying a little bit earlier, we are looking at the actual drawings on the plan set. We actually don't like to see a whole bunch of narrative, but you can have a narrative attached to those drawings. But this is just what that form looks like that I was talking about earlier. And the whole thing about inspector qualifications and making sure you have a qualified inspector in order to get the permit. So then the main other area is going to be this natural buffer zone. And that's what also causes a lot of people, it can be very confusing to interpret the natural buffer zone. But a lot of information you'll want is over here in Appendix B, and that will help give you, for example, some of these projects, actually, I anticipate a decent amount of them are going to have what's these exemptions applied to their project from the 1200C. So the natural buffer zone is a requirement on the permit that says any work within 50 feet of a surface of a basically a surface water is more likely going to be a natural buffer zone. There's a few exceptions to that, but in the plans, if you're working up to that 50 feet of the surface water, you have to install equivalent controls to 50 feet. So let's say you have your buffer zones 50 feet, you're like, I have to work within 30 feet instead of staying 50 feet away from the surface water. You would have to design your plan to install additional controls around the 30 feet or however, whatever measure to meet that 50 feet, the amount of protection you have if there was 50 feet left. That's what the natural buffer zone says. A lot of these projects, you're not just working 50 feet, you're going all the way into the water body. And so that's where it becomes very complicated. You know, the 401, 404 are supposed to have enough designs to reduce the turbidity in the water body for the in-water work, but it might not take into account all of that upland work, although it should. Again, I'm not working in the 401, 404 program, so I'm not as familiar with how they design these plans. All I do is I take the plan and I compare it to what we have in our erosion sediment control plan. I make sure they match. But there's these exemptions here, and they're listed on page 5 of this Appendix B. And they can help inform your project whether or not you actually would need to do this whole natural buffer zone Russell 2 assessment, because with the natural buffer zone, there's a Russell 2, and that's a long program. I'm sure Hannah might have shared with some of you that can be very tricky to use, and it isn't always the funnest program. But what you'll want to do for these projects, if you're concerned about the natural buffer zone, is refer to this section right here and see if any of these exemptions apply. Again, a lot of the times it's going to be that there is a 401, 404 project for this issued. And so we just need to compare to that. And then more likely than not, it'll be something that we don't have to take into account with the erosion and sediment control plan. Does that make sense?
So Martha, this is Mark Croggan, Bureau Reclamation. This was extremely confusing when I read this 10 different times. So the 50-foot buffer zone, yep, if it's there and we can prove it's there by using the Russell 2 program, then we wouldn't have to have a separate erosion barrier if we're working outside of that 50 foot.
Mm-hmm.
And we can show that that 50 foot is a natural buffer zone using the Russell 2 program, then we wouldn't have to do sediment barriers between our work and the stream. Is that kind of what you're saying?
You wouldn't have to have additional controls necessarily. In the specific project that we were talking, when I was working with you guys on your project, there was a lot of confusion when I was trying to explain this with my other coworkers about how to interpret this requirement. And so there's going to be certain situations where, as Mark brought up, it's going to be very complicated as to does this apply or does it not. Typically, you don't even have to do the Russell 2 if your disturbance is 50 feet away from a surface water. And we're talking about not just as the crow flies, we're talking about drainage pathways. So that would be like the second component. If there's not a straight drainage pathway to the surface water and it's going like this, you take the length of that squiggly line. And if it's 50 feet, that you're working within that 50 feet of drainage way to the natural buffer zone, then we would have to have additional controls. And the controls would basically have to show that the reduction in sediment load is equivalent to if you're working 50 feet away. In a lot of eastern region, what I have run into is that there's not a lot of additional controls that a project would need in order to meet that 50 foot, due to the weather, due to soil conditions, a whole bunch of stuff like that. So, and if I hope I'm not getting into too much detail, but in the specific case with Mark's project, several times the straw wattles were enough. One line of straw wattles was enough, even though if you were working within that 50-foot buffer zone. But where there's a 401, 404 water quality project, as long as that's taking into account that upland work, you're going straight into, as we were discussing, taking the Pyrrell, putting it in the creek, doing that right there. As long as the 401, 404 is taking that upland disturbance into account, we actually don't need to do the Russell 2. And I do apologize, Mark, because I know there was a lot of confusion with your specific project, and there was a lot of internal discussion that went back and forth. So I do anticipate that there will probably be other future projects where this is confusing. There has to be a lot of like clarification and back and forth. But in general, you should be able to refer to this. And if the project is working within 50 feet of the waterway, you should be able to kind of like apply this to the project. And there's probably going to be some compliance alternatives that are available. So the one other thing I should say is that it's actually, if the stream is limited for if the stream is listed for turbidity, it's actually becomes 75 feet. But I know, again, in Eastern region, when our maps were recently updated, some of them did not say why they were being listed for turbidity. And as you guys probably already know, some of them were listed because there was a lack of certain deposits on the stream, on the bottom of the stream. I was not made aware of that until later, and I've been working with my coworkers very closely in order to try and figure out, okay, this one needs this kind of work done, this one needs this kind of work done. Essentially, the 75 foot is for those where there's an excess of turbidity in the water column. That's when we really start looking at the 75 foot, although that's not made clear in the permit. Does that make sense?
That helps, but definitely still not clear.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Mark. Yeah, that was the whole project was, as Mark can probably testify, was very confusing. So. Are there any questions?
Mark, did you still want an answer to the question you put in the chat? He asked if you could describe. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Martha, you touched on the inspection requirements, but you should really describe to people the extent of the inspections that are required every 14 days.
Yes.
Throughout the duration of the permit. That's pretty critical.
Yep, and we're actually getting to that. So I think that's right after this. So after you've developed the erosion control plan, I'll get to that in a second, Mark. The one thing I did want to say about the erosion control plan, some additional information. There's a screenshot of the section of the permit that applies to the erosion control plan. It's very long. Please don't let this intimidate you. But there is a lot of information that is required in the sediment erosion control plan. Again, some of that can be covered by what the plan sets already provided. In terms of timeline, just make sure that if there's over 5 acres of disturbance, we have a public notice requirement for the erosion control plan before we can actually issue the permit. So if we have to we have to take the ESCP, put on public notice for 14 days. And if there's any comments, I have to respond to those comments before we can actually issue the permit. Very rarely do I get any comments on erosion sediment control plans, but We never know when that could happen. I do make those a priority. I'm required to respond to those comments immediately. And if for some reason I cannot fully respond to those comments, then of course we would have to send the erosion control plan back. That's extremely rare. But just so you know, the timeline for getting the permit after it's been applied for, all of the permit requires a minimum of 30 days before construction can start. Highly recommend you make it closer to 60 or even greater if you have greater than 5 acres of disturbance, just because there's a lot that will go into that. The other thing that you'll need to remember to include is if there's dewatering going to be involved, if there's any contaminated soils. If you have a DSL 401 permit, we'll want those uploaded as well before I can actually go ahead and issue this permit. During construction, so
Martha, I'm sorry.
Sure. No, go ahead. You're totally fine.
Can you clarify dewatering? People that work in the restoration business think of dewatering probably a different way than you're talking about.
Yes, and let me pull up the permit right quick and I will go to the dewatering section. What we have it specifically defined in our permit as being a little bit different, as Mark said, than what is actually your normal dewatering. So dewatering for us is actually if it leaves and enters surface waters of the state. So if it's going to be contained, although I do want it listed, it's not necessarily the same as a considered or authorized discharge. So let's go. So down here, page 11, construction dewatering activities. This is the section that will apply to dewatering. So for us, it's going to be as you are doing construction, if the groundwater is, if it's taken out, all of them coming up with these examples and not exactly general scenarios, but as Mark was kind of saying, there's the dewatering that you are doing for the 401, 404 permit that may or may not actually apply in the case of your restoration plan. So if you're taking the water from upstream and you're kind of carting around, I do want to see that on the plan, but I don't consider that, for example, to be dewatering. I'm more thinking of in general terms, because a lot of these apply to our residential building plans. We're actually looking at the holes being dug in the ground that tend to be really dirty and the water coming out of that. So we're more concerned about the water that's being pumped out of a location in order to either, let's say, build a post hole, put your foundation in the ground, and then I will sometimes apply that to certain projects, but a lot of times that's also already covered in the 401, 404. So I might want it, hey, you're taking the water from here to here. I might want that in the plan so I can see what's going on, but it's not the same as your construction construction dewatering that I'm thinking of. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks for the clarification.
Okay. Yep. So yeah, so just make sure if there is any questions about, hey, does the permit apply to this? Feel free to ask. So during construction, there's a lot of stuff that has to be maintained. It was previously in the PowerPoint, but the ESCP is a living document and needs to be kept updated with changes that happen on site. So if you're like, hey, we had silt fence here, the silt fence is like a terrible idea, we want to trade it out. That's something you'd have to submit to me, but it's something you could do. So you can make changes as you need to the sediment erosion control plan. The only time you'll have to send it in to me is if, hey, we need to update the area we're disturbing. Hey, we need to update these controls. You know, normally I won't be asking for this information unless I'm doing my own inspection, and then I'll be like, hey, send it in. So definitely check the permit to see what needs to be sent in. And then the other thing that, as Mark said about the inspections, this is a major component. It can be a major expense because the inspections are required on the initial date of any land disturbing activities starting, which includes installing erosion and sediment controls. Then every 14 days and 24 hours within a storm event, that generates a discharge. This is the part that trips people up because it's 24 hours that generates a discharge, and that varies widely throughout the state. There are some places that have an inch of rain and there's not going to be a discharge that occurs, and places that have 0.1 inches of rain and a discharge is going to occur from their site. You need to make sure it's properly documented in the inspection reports of when that storm event's going to happen. And that can be either through, hey, we did a site visit and we saw a discharge happening at this point, or some sort of engineering that kind of informs that. There are exceptions to if you can get out there or not that are also listed in the permit, and that includes if your area is temporarily stabilized, covered by snow, and then as well if you're going into final stabilization. And if it's covered by snow and if you're not readily accessible, it's kind of indefinite. If it's temporarily stabilized, it changes to 30 days. But that can be a major expense for a lot of places, Mark was alluding to, just because a lot of these places are so isolated. But feel free to ask me if you're concerned about, hey, when do we need to do an inspection? And then I'll make this really quick. The last part, terminations, 70% vegetative density is what the permit says. I do 70% of original vegetative density. I look very closely at the plan sets to make sure that I'm staying in compliance with what is actually the 401, 404 being called for. There might be some areas that aren't covered in the 401, 404. And then I'll try and make sure I'm capturing those in the erosion sediment control plan. In general, I'm going to be referring to those other plans for those other permits and making sure I'm staying in line with those and not requiring anything additional or different from that, unless we're talking about some additional upland areas. Just make sure if you have stockpiles, you have good native seeding for those and temporary controls. Again, you guys are aware of how long it can take seed to grow and germinate. So just make sure that you're keeping that in mind when trying to terminate the permit, because I actually cannot terminate my permit until all areas that were disturbed as a part of construction have been stabilized. That can include seeding, can include other measures as well, but for the most part, it's going to be seeding. So yep, the termination process through YDO is fairly simple. Just include a lot of photos. If you're having any trouble, feel free to let me know. So again, those are specific challenges that tend to come up during the that I've seen for past projects. So if you're having any problems with any part of those, feel free to email me and reach out. I apologize for going 2 minutes over.
You're totally fine.
Martha, can I jump in with another question or two?
It's fine by me.
Related to the closing out the permit. So it's pretty clear that the permit is for areas, stormwater runoff for areas above the ordinary high water mark.
Yep.
A lot of the projects that we typically work on increase the bed elevation to where the much of the floodplain becomes within the ordinary high water mark.
Mm-hmm.
At what point does the permit recognize that the ordinary high water mark has changed, and in 1200C no longer regulates that? Because trying to reestablish a 70% coverage of disturbed floodplain within the new ordinary high water mark is a way different endeavor sometimes than upland or stuff outside of the new ordinary high water mark. Can you address that?
Absolutely. And I will say that the permit doesn't clearly address that at all. It doesn't make it very clear when something has become an ordinary below the ordinary high water mark. that changes. And that was kind of what I was trying to allude to earlier, as I will start referring to what's in the 401, 404 plan for anything that's below the ordinary high water mark. And then others places, and some plans I've seen that they take into account some areas above the ordinary high water mark. So I have kind of switched to deferring to what's in that plan. If there is no 401, 404, and it's below the ordinary high water mark, that's going to be one of the things that we're going to have to add to the next permit revision, how to deal with that, especially because we don't have a lot of direct authority over those areas that are below the ordinary high water mark. Since the permit doesn't authorize work within those areas, it becomes this real gray area. What I'm looking for, as long as the plans reflect that, I'm going to try my best to compare that during the termination request. So you might get some questions from me being like, hey, why isn't this area seeded? Hey, why does it look like this? And if you can respond back to me, this is what's within the below the ordinary high water mark now. I'm going to add that to my I'm going to add that to the permit termination, basically make it very clear, hey, this is a different situation. And it's part of me getting used to this position as well. As I know now, a lot of the projects, once it's below the ordinary high water mark, it's kind of a different animal. So I know that doesn't quite answer your question, Mark, but in general, I'm not looking for that 70% vegetative density anymore. And I'm only looking for 70% vegetative of original, for those areas that are upland above the ordinary high water mark. Does that make a little bit more sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, in future permit language, it'd be good to clarify a lot of that, because that's going to be a confusing point for
Yeah.
for everybody going forward.
And I feel like there could be a whole training just on that, honestly. So
Yeah. Like we've talked about, this whole permit system was written for parking lots and housing developments, not restoration. So there needs to be a complete rewrite of the permitting system to address restoration, either by a separate permitting process or a whole bunch of changes to the permit language to make this viable for people.
And I've definitely taken those comments, and we have a new stormwater manager I've passed that on to. We're actually getting a new permit writer in that position. So although I can't say that I have any direct say over what the new permit will look like, I've definitely been collecting that information and passing it on to my coworkers. So.
And the last thing that I think is to reiterate what the triggers, just kind of the worst case scenario. From what I understand, if you have a mile of gravel road leading to your project, a mile of gravel road is over an acre. That the fact that you're using that gravel road triggers the permit. Is that correct?
That was the past interpretation given to us by kind of like our manager and the person who is in charge of writing the 1200C. The truth is it's still a little bit more convoluted than that. So I've been bringing that's going to be one of those topics of conversation that we have when we have a new person in that position. It could, but if the mile of gravel road is, either a public way that's going to be public access road that's going to have a lot of disturbance anyways, it really depends on the amount of additional disturbance that's generated by the project. So it could trigger, it might not. I have a project where they almost triggered because of that, but after talking with them about the gravel road and how stabilized it is and other factors, it was determined, 1200C isn't going to be triggered by that alone. I know that doesn't give you an answer, but what I'm basically trying to say is that we're moving away from just a gravel road triggering the 1200C. It would have to be mostly a dirt road alongside a waterway, and then it would more likely have the potential to trigger the 1200C, but not necessarily.
Okay, because that's key thing. I mean, there's a lot of very simple projects going in stream, like post rows and stuff that has very little disturbance, but just the access road is going to trigger the 1200C, and that's really crazy.
Yep, and that's something that I have been talking about. Again, we have a new person who started in August for our stormwater manager, and we're going to have a new person in that position writing the next iteration of the 1200C. And that's going to be one of those things that we're going to discuss. So, but
Okay.
yeah, in your specifics area that you're talking about, it would depend on the length of the access road, proximity to the surface waterway, and then the condition of the road. If it was a straight up dirt road that's going in and it's alongside the waterway the whole time with the potential to discharge to that surface water of the state, and it's, you know, basically being generated by the activities, I can see that triggering of the 1200C, but that is something that we would have to discuss. So.
Thanks so
That'd be
much,
a worst
Martha.
case scenario.
If folks have extra other questions for you, can they reach out?
Absolutely. I will drop my
Can you-
information in the chat.
Great, thank you. I'm going to kick you out of screen sharing.
Yep.
Thanks. So just quickly, if you haven't added your organization to your name, if you could do that, if you just click on presentation or sorry, participants, if you click on participants, you'll see yourself at the top, and then you can click rename, just so we know who's here and we're keeping track of attendance. So we just want to know who's here. So if you could do that, thanks. And next we have Kaylin Barter and Femke Freiberg. So do you have your presentations ready? You don't need to send them to me, right?
Have it ready.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna try sharing screen, see what
Yeah.
happens. All right. Okay, and then if I go slideshow, let's see if that works. That's not it. One moment. Let's try this again. That looks good. I just can't see my. Darn it. One moment, folks. Third time's a charm. I think this is going to work. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Kaylin Barter. I'm a senior program manager for the water policy program at the Wild Salmon Center. And we have a lot to cover, so I'm going to dive right in. Quick overview for our presentation today. Cover what we, Wild Salmon Center, do and what we don't do. We'll take a look at what the problem is, run through a bunch of tools for fixing that problem. And then I will touch on some ways to pay for it. And then I'm going to hand it over to Femke, who's going to talk more about the Columbia Basin Water Transactions Program, which is another specific way to pay for it. Quick note on what we don't do. Wild Salmon Center doesn't do stream flow restoration transactions. We don't have a program for that. But there are partners in the partnership who do that kind of work, and there's other groups across the state. One of the reasons that I'm here today is because there's a bunch of new money that's out there to do this kind of work. And there's a lot of, I would say, increased ability to tap into capacity support for doing stream flow restoration. And so in talking with OWEB and in talking with watershed councils, we thought it would be a good time just to tee this back up again because this was identified as stream flow shortages were identified as a major challenge for recovery of fish in the John Day and throughout the Columbia Basin. All right. So here's the obligatory fish pick. This is a big wild steelhead from the John Day. I mean, this is really what the John Day is capable of producing. So what does Wild Salmon Center do? Well, we protect flows for fish by advocating for better policies at the state level and try to restore flow to struggling river systems. What that means is trying to pass policies that get the best projects in the best places, that really target agency investments that will elevate stream flow and water management decisions, and then fighting for stream flow friendly policies. And then finally, we support. And what we mean by that is strengthening coordination and capacity, especially at the local level. Particularly, we want to be able to enhance capacity of place-based groups like this one to engage in local and regional water planning processes. I'll just share that I'm a charter signatory to the Mid-Coast Water Planning Partnership and have been in that role for 3.5 years. So it's just really exciting to be able to kind of cross over into another basin planning initiative. Here's our vision. One that hopefully resonates with a lot of folks here. Healthy habitats, abundant clean water that provides an ecological baseline capable of supporting self-sustaining salmon populations. And I'll say salmonid to include those steelhead. All right, so quick pop quiz. And feel free to shout it out. Who owns all of the water in Oregon? Anyone? Don't make me call on people.
The citizens of the state of Oregon.
Exactly right. Thank you for piping up. Here's the statutory definition. All water within the state from all sources of water supply belongs to the public. So this is a piece that I think gets lost often in the fighting, is we forget that all of this water belongs to all of us in Oregon. And what you get when you have a water right is a right to use that water. So it might sound like a distinction without a difference, but I think it's just really important for all of us to remember that we really all are, I think, fighting for the same things. Enough water, abundant, cold, clean water to do what it is that we need to do. So here's the problem. Our surface water supplies are severely overallocated, even in non-drought years. And what that means is that there's been many more rights issued or recognized to use water than water that exists that's flowing in rivers and streams and that is sitting in groundwater aquifers. So we're going to do just a real quick field trip over to the John Day FIP report for Native Fish Habitat Initiative. And I think looking at, I'm going to make sure you all can see. Can you see this really complicated flow chart here?
Unfortunately, yes, Caitlin, we all can. Thank you.
Okay, well, it gets better. I put that up intentionally because it looks complicated, but I do want to keep grounding us in that that vision. I think this is a lot prettier. This is a report that is out of the partnership, and it identifies strategies that can achieve, I think it says up here, clean water and healthy watersheds sufficient to provide the sustainable ecological, economic, and cultural well-being of the basin. And then I want to jump back in here to our presentation And this is strategy number 1. So this is what we're really going to be focused on today. Dedicate land and water to restoration and preservation of stream habitat. So partners will work with willing landowners to enter into contractual agreements, such as conservation easements on working lands or flow agreements to protect core fish habitat. So why do we need these? Well, because there's we really overshot what our natural supplies can supply. So these maps show summertime water availability that's calculated by the Water Resources Department. And you can see in summertime, brown is not a good color for this map. So it shows no water available is in those tan areas. And under the rules, the Oregon's administrative rules, just read off what it means. Over appropriated means a condition of water allocation in which the quantity of surface water available during a specified period is not sufficient to meet the expected demands from all water rights at least 80% of the time. You can see in winter, there's the situation's a little bit better, and that's because they use a 50% standard for that time of year. Well, how did we get here? Quick journey back in time. Our water rights system really was built to support rapid development of the West. First in time, first in right is that prior appropriation basics. So in the 1850s, we had big westward migration along with the gold rush. And that same system that was used for mining claims got imported into water. 1909, state passed a water code. So now instead of tacking up a piece of paper next to your diversion that you've built from a river, now you have to apply to the state for a permit. 1955, groundwater comes within that permitting code, and the Minimum Perennial Stream Flow Act is passed. And then finally in 1987, in-stream water rights are placed on the same footing as out-of-stream water rights. So those overallocated rivers are always in drought, meaning that even with normal precipitation, and normal is a shifting target with a changing climate, water withdrawals for human uses are typically hitting rivers the hardest when natural flows are at their very lowest. And this graph comes out of Oregon's Integrated Water Resources Strategy, where you can see the blue line is a typical stream flow distribution throughout the calendar year. Your orange line is typical municipal requirements during the course of that same year. And then your irrigation requirements are in that green line. So right as your flows are dropping to their lowest, you've got out-of-stream diversions being needed to support plant growth. So how did this year shape up? Well, in 3 words, hot, dry, and bony. And here are just some pretty striking images of what was going on this summer. So this was July 2023. This is, it was hot. So this is deviation from what's defined as normal for the last 30 years. It was dry. This was July's percent of normal precip over that same time period. And it was bony. So these were your average stream flows as a percent of normal. And through the John Day, you can see, Grant County, we're at 72%, Wheeler, 21%. So hot and dry conditions aren't good for streams. Now we get into the fun part. How do we fix it? Well, stream flow restoration is the path forward. There's 2 different approaches here. There's Water Resources Department tools where you can make a change to an existing water right. And then there's some pretty cool contract-based tools where through a contractual agreement, you're looking to change really the behavior and the water use of the water right holder. Quick overview, we're going to touch on in-stream leases, in-stream transfers, allocations of conserved water, a change in where the water is diverted from the stream, and then water right substitutions. And we will provide this PowerPoint after, so don't feel like you need to be writing all of this down. And then in terms of contract-based tools, we'll be looking at flow and temperature triggers, and then date triggers. Quick note, these voluntary water right transactions that we're going to be looking at are not in-stream, not new in-stream water rights. Those are a mechanism to protect flows that are needed for fish, or for recreation, or for water quality. And so there's 3 state agencies that can apply for new in-stream water rights. That's ODF&W, Oregon DEQ, and Oregon Parks. These bar charts really show you the impact of how those those new in-stream water right applications work. So if the system is already fully or over allocated, then those new in-stream water rights, they carry the date that they were applied for. So if it's applied for in 2023, it's going to have a priority date of 2023. And this shows on the left-hand side, those in-stream water rights will sit on top. If the system's mostly allocated and the remaining water needs to be protected in stream, then the in-stream water right will take one moment. Thanks. And then if the system's largely unallocated, then again, it's the same where you have your existing water rights in the blue. Your in-stream water right gets layered on top of that as the most junior in the system. And then the remaining capacity in the system is still available for appropriation. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about stream flow restoration tools. So these tools have been deployed in the John Day historically over the last couple of decades. This one's been pretty common. So this is a full season in-stream lease. Through these, a water right holder applies to the Oregon Water Resources Department for a temporary change of water right of the water right, or a portion of it from the existing use to in-stream use. So typically you'd be looking at an irrigation water right where maybe you've got 50 acres under that water right, and there's 20 acres that are kind of just a pain in the butt to get water to, and or maybe you're doing a rotation and that whole 50 acres is not going to be irrigated that year. Well, you can apply for an in-stream lease. It requires dry up of those acres. If there's a supplemental right, you can't use that supplemental right instead. They can be for as short as 1 year up to as long as 5 years, and they're renewable. There's an expedited review process because they're easily unwound. So if it turns out that after they're approved, that there's harm to other water rights as a result of the lease, then it's easily unwound. And then once the water is protected, then once it's approved, that water is protected from diversion based on priority right. So if it's a junior priority right to another right on the stream, then it doesn't have any impact on that water right. Also, these are evaluated by the department, and the amount reduced, they're reduced in an amount to make sure that it's not enlarging the use of the water right. For instance, by no longer having return flows from that water right usage. And I should say, if folks have questions, please feel free to shout them out. That'll let me know that there's anybody listening. And we can also take questions at the end too. Really, there's a lot of content here, but this is a map that was prepared by the Freshwater Trust. And these are all available through the Oregon Water Resources Department's webpage. Here you can see that there's an existing water right, only a portion of it is going to be under the in-stream lease. And then at the end of that application process, there'll be a final order that protects that water in the stream. And at that point, it can be protected from diversion, just like any other water right. More tools. Here's a special kind of in-stream lease called a split season lease. This allows water users to split the use of their water right. And what I mean there is that typically in the early season, plants are still growing vigorously. There's a lot of water in the stream, and that is when you're probably going to get your best yield from using water. Later in the summer, those plants are starting to shut down, and you need a lot more water just to keep them producing. And meanwhile, the stream has a lot less water to give. So this is a tool where water users can use that water right in the early season. Then there's a shutoff date, and the remaining amount of that water is protected in stream through the rest of the season. This tool requires a measuring device to make sure that more water isn't, that the water right isn't being enlarged through this process. This had a sunset in 2023, except that we managed to pass a bill, House Bill 3164, in the last legislative session, with support both from conservation groups and from farming groups, that has really opened up this tool. And I think it could be a really great opportunity in the John Day specifically. It also had a 10-year cap on the number of times that a water right could use this tool. And we successfully removed that cap as well. Transfers. So as anyone knows who's tried to go through the administrative transfer process for an existing water right for anything, whether that's moving a point of diversion or moving, where the place of use, it takes a while. It's heavy on time, it's heavy on cost. And my images are in here because I just Googled heavy. And this big plane came up and heavy metal came up. So permanent transfers on the left-hand side. This is what's often referred to as buy and dry. In this situation, it's a permanent change of a water right or a portion of that water right from its existing use to in-stream use. And it goes through very heavy review by OWRD to make sure that that change isn't going to harm other water rights. Another variation of that is a time-limited transfer. So it's the same level of review, but it is for a shorter duration. So not forever, something less than forever. They can be set up where if some condition occurs, then the transfer automatically reverts to the prior use. Another exciting tool that there's a lot of potential in the John Day is the allocation of conserved water program. And so if you have existing infrastructure that isn't as efficient as it could be, then folks can use these funds and use this program to, for instance, pipe or line a leak canal or ditch, or convert water application from flood to pivot. The department will go through an assessment process where return flows are subtracted from the saved water, and then the portion of the water that's saved is split based on how much public funding went to the project. So let's say it was half funded by public funds, then half of that saved water would be protected in stream, and then the other half would go to the water right holder to either layer on top of existing lands or even to spread to new lands. The other option for stream flow restoration, you can change your point of diversion. So you might have an upstream point that if you moved it downstream, it would allow that water to be in the river longer. Also, consolidating multiple points of diversion can have that same impact. Or there's the option to move a point of diversion from a tributary down to a main stem where there might be more reliable water, and where if that tributary is consistently dewatered, that can have a really big impact for fish. Another one that we won't spend much time on would just be water right substitutions, where you're taking a supplemental right and flipping it to become your primary right. Often that would be making a groundwater right the primary and making the surface water right the supplemental. Now we're getting into some more, I would say, exotic tools. there are contract-based tools that have been used, like the Lostine Minimum Flow Agreement. In that program, I think about 70 water right holders in the Lostine all agree to maintain a certain amount of flow in the Lostine River for a period of concern for fish. And if they meet those targets, then there's financial incentives for that. 15-mile action to stabilize temperatures is another really cool program where instead of using a flow amount, it uses predicted stream temperature amounts. We'll get into that quickly. We'll do a quick run through that FAST program because I think there's actually been some efforts to import that into the John Day, and it would be neat to figure out how to do that. Another simple method, more simple, is just a time trigger. You know, maybe on a certain date, the parties agree that the irrigator is going to shut off, and then they'll receive compensation for that. Often that will only be a viable tool if there's very few users on a system or even a single user. So really these, because these are outside of the Water Resource Department enforcement realm, you have to make sure that it works for everybody here. All right, quick tour through FAST, the 15-mile action to stabilize temperature. 15-mile is a trip to the Columbia, includes several different watersheds. There's significant irrigation diversions from a pretty small water system, and it is 303D listed for temperature and sediment. Well, in 2009, there was a significant fish kill, and that occurred due to a period of prolonged high water temperatures when diversions were happening at the same time. And so what was left behind just wasn't adequate for fish to live. NOAA Fisheries conducted an investigation, determined that there was potential for civil and criminal penalties under the Endangered Species Act, and determined that a strategy was needed to avoid take going forward, and also one that would reduce liability for irrigators in the system. So it has 5 components. There's this predictive stream temperature model that was developed by ODF&W. There's daily forecasts that go out to all of the enrolled irrigators in the area, as well as fast alerts. So you can actually sign up to get those either by text message or a variety of different ways. There's compensation available for people who cut back their diversions during an alert. There's a measurement and reporting and monitoring requirement. And then there's a process of adaptive management each year of, hey, how'd that go? And how can we do it better next year? It's worked. So based on, it used the historic flow and climate data, real-time measurement, and really it was this looming regulatory risk in a pretty close-knit community. All of those things combined to make a really proactive, data-driven and cooperative solution. It's been great because it gives irrigators in the system the information that they need to be able to manage both the water resource and their growing resources. It really operates outside of the first in time, first in right system. And it, as the last bullet says, you know, optimizes conservation dollars for maximum ecological return. You're paying for water when you really need it in the river. There's a lot of money out there right now. This is not something that we've experienced in the streamflow restoration world before. And I'll share, I used to run the streamflow restoration program at the Freshwater Trust. I guess it's going on 6, 7, 8 years now ago. But I'll just run through these quickly. I'll share that, I don't want to take away any of Femke's thunder, but Bonneville Power Administration's Columbia Basin Water Transaction Program has been just such a force in this space for water transactions over the years. And for a lot of that time, they've really been the only game in town. And that's been, wonderful if you're able to leverage those dollars, but really hard if you're in an area where that program doesn't apply. Good news is in the John Day, it does apply. So I think Femke's going to share more about that. OWEB also has a huge infusion of new money that we secured in the 2022 legislative session and then re-upped in the 2023 legislative session. So there's money for deals there. ODF&W is administering a new mitigation account for the private forest accord. That is going to be generating, I think, $15 million a year for actions that will improve stream conditions for listed species. And in-stream flow transactions is called out specifically as one of those actions. Water Resources Department has significant funding, and there's also funding available through Bureau of Reclamation. Now, the second group here, programmatic funding, has been a lot harder to secure, and there's also good news there. BPA, as I mentioned, there's the Columbia Basin Water Transactions Program, but there's also increased availability of stakeholder engagement funds through OWEB. And Bureau of Reclamation has some Water Smart water strategy funds and other funding sources that are currently available. And then I just threw in NOAA question mark because based on the Hannah's report at the beginning, I wonder, if that's something that could also go toward development of these deals. Technical assistance. You've got great folks at ODF&W and Water Resources Department, potentially ODA. I'm not sure what the status of the FIP is as a kind of jumping into this from over on the other side of the state, but they might be a resource as well. There's related programs for land acquisitions through the Oregon Ag Heritage Program and through land trusts. Other policy context to keep in mind is that in April 2026, there's a court-ordered delivery date for a new temperature TMDL in the John Day. I'm not sure what the status of SIA is, but those are things to keep in mind. And then finally, there is a lot more cabinet level coordination. So the leads of the various state agencies that do this work are really coordinating around how to leverage federal money and match it with state money to get good work done fast. So with that, I have reached the end of my presentation. Happy to take questions. Here's my contact information, and I will stop sharing.
Thanks so much, Kaylin.
My pleasure. I guess I'll also share one last thing, and before Femke drops in, and that's that I talked briefly with a project manager with Trout Unlimited, who her focus is in Northeast Oregon, and as I understand it right now, the Trout Unlimited doesn't have a dedicated program manager in the John Day, which has really been hard not to have Freshwater Trust doing work there and not to have Trout Unlimited doing work. And so we're really hopeful that we can use this presentation to maybe jumpstart interest in identifying a new QLE, which Femke is going to tell us more about. But with that, I'm going to be quiet. Thank you.
Can you all hear me? Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Kaylin, and really teed up kind of hopefully I can add a little bit more flavor to specifically the Columbia Basin Water Transactions Program. So hi, everyone. My name is Femke Freiberg. I'm the Western Water Program Director for National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, or NIFWF, as we call ourselves. And yep, like I said, we'll be talking about our Columbia Basin Water Transactions Program. So a little background on NIFWIF. We are the nation's largest conservation grant-making organization. We're a 501c3 nonprofit and are dedicated to sustaining, restoring, and enhancing the nation's fish, wildlife, plants, and habitats for current and future generations. And we do that by building partnerships with the public sector and public agencies, as well as the private partnerships, including with corporations and other nonprofits and individuals. And we kind of leverage those funds to make grants primarily for on-the-ground conservation work across the country. So we operate in all 50 states and US territories. We've funded, since we were founded in 1984, we've funded over 21,000 projects across the country. And like I said, we invest really in on-the-ground conservation work. So we do not support advocacy or litigation, which is an important part of our mission. So kind of honing in a little bit on the Columbia Basin. This was, as Kaylin mentioned, primarily a partnership with Bonneville Power, and I'll talk a little bit more about the backstory on the next slide, but it was established in 2002, so over 20 years old, this program. And the goal was to restore flows to key fish habitats through voluntary market-based water rights acquisitions and other incentive-based approaches. So truly water transactions. And at the time, this was a novel program. It was really meant to see, is this even possible to do voluntary water transactions in the basin to improve flows? And so over the past 20 years, we've really built up the program with our number of partners to demonstrate that, in fact, it is feasible. And this effort in the Columbia Basin, which, of course, includes the John Day, has now become the largest flow restoration program in the country. And so the program operates with three major strategies. The first is to build relationships with landowners through a network of qualified local entities, or QLEs, and I'll describe more what that is in a moment. Then we deploy permanent and short-term transactions to protect water and stream. And finally, we account for the outcomes with a monitoring program. So those are kind of the three components of the program. And just a little bit of backstory and kind of acknowledgement of the partners to this effort, because it certainly takes a very robust and large kind of policy and partner community to make this program effective. So there's really three main policy directives that inform the prioritization of flow restoration work under the program. First is the Northwest Power Act that provides overarching guidance to restore and mitigate impacts of the power system on fish and wildlife. And we rely on restoration plans, or sub-basin plans, as the NPCC calls them, to direct our work. Then second, we have the Endangered Species Act and the associated recovery plans for listed species, and that includes Chinook, steelhead, and bull trout. And that provides a second layer of prioritization and direction for the program. And then lastly, there's the FCRPS biological opinion and associated RPAs, and that provides another articulation of restoration priorities and goals, including kind of specific targeted subbasins and species as well. So while each of these efforts has its own kind of unique legal purpose and policy rationale, they all identify flow as a key limiting factor for native fish in the basin. And so the program is primarily funded by Bonneville Power Administration with additional funding from partners like U.S. Forest Service and Altria, which is a private corporation. And we also bring in expertise for a technical advisory committee from NOAA, National Marine Fisheries Service, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And of course, working with tribal governments is kind of a foundational component of this whole effort and the background of how it came to be. And so there's tribal trust and treaty provisions that are also kind of a key component to how this program came to be and how it's run today. So over time and kind of 20 years of operation, the program has been able to support over 660 transactions, and that's across the U.S. portion of the Columbia Basin. So we do operate in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Western Montana. And these transactions are totaling almost 750 billion gallons of water protected in stream. So it's a robust program. Like I said, we operate across the entire basin. And the map here kind of shows you just a smattering of active transactions in 2021. And so we really target again, a lot of the transactions you'll see are not on like the main stem of the Columbia, for example, but are really in these smaller tributaries where we know that there's really critical habitat for the species that we care about. So kind of going back to a very relevant component to this group, hopefully, but the first kind of leg of the stool of the program is this supporting qualified local entities. So what is a qualified local entity? And essentially this is just an organization that's operating within a basin that's been approved for programmatic funding under the program. And so what these QLEs do is primarily build relationships, build trust. And so they're groups that are working with local partners and landowners, really working to understand the way water works in the basin, who the major water users are. And they use those relationships to actually develop short and long-term water transactions. And then once they put together those transactions, then they submit water transaction proposals for review by our program's technical advisory committee, and then they get funded. So the qualified local entity is an absolutely critical component of the program, and the work that they do working with landowners and being based in the basin in which they're developing transactions is like the fundamental part of this entire effort. So how do water transactions work? Kaylin, thank you so much for really going to the details of all the different types of water transactions. And like I said, the key number one step is just building trust and understanding the needs of the water rights holder. So this program is completely voluntary. We have to work with willing landowners and water users. And so without an actual relationship and understanding of the water use of the water rights holder, there's no transaction. So that's the number one step. Then once you kind of find a strategy that works for the individual, so Kaylin outlined all the different types of water transactions that are out there. There's permanent transactions, acquisitions, and permanent transfers, temporary or short-term transactions like leases, split season leases, and then conserved water projects like irrigation efficiency, where there's then kind of a measurable benefit in stream. So once you develop your strategy, there's a lot of consultation with legal, economic, and monitoring experts on kind of developing all the specific terms of the transaction, including how much to pay for the water. Then there's this step of seeking state agency approval to protect the water in stream. So that's absolutely critical component in Oregon in particular. And then once the state has approved the protected water in stream, then NIFWIF will fund the transaction and the flows are improved. And so a cool example, this photo is from the Middle Deschutes, and I took this photo last July. So this is July 11th, so kind of middle of the summer. And this stretch in the Middle Deschutes is below the major irrigation district diversions. And so previously they had completely dewatered the stretch of river. And so the Deschutes River Conservancy, which is one of our QLEs, worked to implement 98 individual water transactions. So that's a mix of permanent, short-term, and conserved water transactions to secure all of the water that you see in the photo to keep the stretch of river flowing. And you can't really see well in the photo, but there's like an angler on one side of the river, and there's a family kind of wading and splashing on the other side. So these projects are, they're good for fish and also good for the community and just kind of the vitality of watersheds across the basin. So I liked this example. So CPWTP has been active in the John Day. We just kind of two short examples, and the QLE that we're currently working with in the John Day is Trout Unlimited. But there's definitely opportunity, and I'll talk a little more about this for another QLE or multiple QLEs. So it's not, this is a collaborative program. The QLEs work together, and we have annual meetings where we bring everyone together and share lessons learned. So it's not unheard of for there to be multiple QLEs working in one basin, especially such a large and diverse area as the John Day. And so there's opportunity for more QLEs to be active and receive programmatic funding in the John Day. So just two examples of the type of transactions in this area, a 10-year forbearance agreement on Reynolds Creek. So that's high priority trib for salmon and steelhead. And it's cool late season flows, 3.68 CFS to the upper main stem John Day. And then another example on Beach Creek, which is also important for steelhead and Chinook. And so that was a transaction that provides 1.73 CFS and 276 acre feet in stream annually. So both of those are long-term agreements, 10 years, but not permanent transfers. So just kind of two examples of some of the past activity. And so a quick kind of preview of the funding that we do offer through the Columbia Basin Water Transactions Program. So we have programmatic funding, and this is kind of all the work that goes into developing the transaction. So this is staff time, travel, supplies and materials. And these are grants that are given annually. So we have an open request for proposals annually, and an interested organization can submit a proposal for a programmatic grant. And essentially that then qualifies you to be a QLE. And then you can get to work developing your transaction. So you can join and participate in the program without actually having a water deal ready to go. But if you are an organization that's interested in developing water deals, then you can apply for this programmatic funding to kind of support your efforts in pulling it together. And then once you receive that programmatic funding and become a QLE, then you become eligible for transactional funding. And so that's the funding that goes to support the direct cost of water. And this is a separate submission and review process that's kind of rolling throughout the year. So we have a couple different deadlines where you can submit your water transactions to be considered by our technical advisory committee. And then will determine if they will be funded or not. So those are the two types of funding. If there is interest, we will have another RFP open in late February 2024, and that's for the programmatic funding. So that's kind of to become a QLE. And there's an applicant webinar to kind of learn all the ins and outs. I'm also available to answer questions. I have a colleague, Alex Mahmood, who I think is on the phone here today, but he's our Pacific Northwest Watersheds manager. So we have kind of a small staff of folks who can help guide you through the proposal process if you are interested. And our website, if you just do nifwif.org and scroll through to find Columbia Basin Water Transactions Program, you can find all sorts of information, including last year's RFP, to kind of give you a sense of what the RFP looks like. And then other opportunities. So the John Day is definitely very high priority for native fish. And so we have we were put last summer kind of working together with Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs and Confederated Tribes of Umatilla Indian Reservation, as well as Trout Unlimited, to apply for new funding to bring specifically to the John Day from NRCS. And the goal of this was to kind of secure a pot of funding that would go to build drought resilience through on-farm irrigation efficiency water conservation projects that have some sort of measurable in-stream flow benefit for fish. And we applied for funding. We're unsuccessful in the first round, but got quite a bit of good feedback on the proposal. And so we are planning to take another shot and try to get more funding specifically for these kind of on-farm water conservation efforts. And if you are interested in kind of learning more about that piece, working with landowners and looking at water conservation work in particular, then please reach out because the funding opportunity is through the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. And so this whole effort is meant to be bringing in local partners within the basin to work together to deploy this funding. So we are open to accepting new partners to the proposal as we put together kind of another application to NRCS. So I wanted to flag that for folks as well. And that brings me to the end of what I have prepared. So happy to answer questions.
There is a question in the chat. Rebecca asked, does the CBWTP have streamflow monitoring data that demonstrate, oh, it went away. Rebecca, do you want to just ask your question My chat just went away.
Yeah, so I was asking if you have Streamflow monitoring data that demonstrates that you're actually seeing in-stream flow benefits and increases compared to just future protection that those in-stream flows aren't withdrawn. You know, I'm with National Marine Fisheries, and that's locally in the east area, and that's one of the things we're really trying to throughout the John Day Basin, really get demonstration of data that's supporting all the efforts.
Yes,
Thanks.
so we do have quite a robust monitoring program. We work with a consulting team, groups called Four Peaks Environmental. They're based out of Wenatchee, Washington, but they work with each of the qualified local entities to ensure that there's a monitoring plan on every transaction that we fund, and it starts with flow monitoring. So we'll essentially the monitoring program is kind of tiered up. So there's compliance to just making sure, like, you know, is the tap turned off or on, or, you know, is there compliance with the transaction? And then the next step, which the goal is for every transaction to have at least compliance and flow monitoring. So that is like flow loggers and ways to show that the flow is actually making its way into the stream. So yes, that's definitely part of the program. We have a pretty extensive monitoring report that we create for the program every year. And that is information I could follow up with you, Rebecca, if you wanted to if you had specific questions.
Yeah, I'll probably be following up with you and Kaylin as well. I know we have a representative that's been working with you guys out of our, I think our Portland office, but definitely within our local Columbia Basin geography, we're wanting to, yeah, work on this more because it's a priority. So thank you.
Great.
Thanks so much. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, so we're going to take a break, but we're just going to keep it to 10 minutes since we've gone over time. So we'll be back. We'll come back at 12 o'clock, 11 o'clock.
Thanks for having us, and sorry to push us over time.
Oh, no, you're fine. Thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure.
Thanks,
Great job,
Kaylin,
Penka.
Penka.
Thanks a lot.
All right, see you all in 10 minutes. All right, we have less than a minute left. Start coming back soon. All right, so it is 12 o'clock. Hopefully everybody is stretched and had some water. So we're going to go through the list of all of the partners and everyone's going to share their one biggest accomplishment. Let's keep it at a 2-minute share if we can. So I hope everybody's here. I can't see any of you, so I'm just assuming that you're all there and listening to me. But let's see. We'll start with Gilliam SWCD. Do we have a representative here? Herb?
Sorry, I was just getting back in.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm rushing you.
Um, yeah, as far as accomplishments go, we were able to finish our first phase 2 BDA project this summer on about 1.5 miles of stream, about 70 structures were basically beefed up. So it's the first time we've done that with our contractor, and it went smoothly. So it was nice to get that done. That's all.
Great, thanks. Oh, and I should have said, when you share, can you say your name and your organization, and then we can just go through the list. So we'll just go down. So North Fork John Day Watershed Council. Do we have anyone here from North Fork John Day Watershed Council that wants to share their biggest
Oh
accomplishment?
man, I had the double mute going on. I was really talking away. This is Kristen Walls with the North Fork John Day Watershed Council. I'll just go quickly, and then I don't know if Javen wants to add anything, but and I think we talked about this at like biggest accomplishments of 2022. So it's taken us a while, but we are this week. The greenhouses will be installed in the backyard at the Watershed Council. So we've made some progress with that program, which is really exciting. We've secured some funding for it, and so I think within the year it's become less conceptual, and we're implementing that program. So that's really exciting. And I'd say that is it. Javen, do you want to add anything?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay. That is our biggest accomplishment here at the North Fork John Day Watershed Council. One of them.
Great, thanks for sharing, Kristen.
Yep.
Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Stephen Kelly with the Warm Springs Tribes. I don't have a singular big accomplishment for this year. We were a little bit lighter on implementation. We had a bunch of smaller stuff go in, but it was a really good year to be able to support some of the great work that our partners are doing. It was exciting to see some of that go in, especially the Murderers Creek Restoration Project. It was awesome to be able to play a small part in the implementation of that, but to also see all that great work from ODFW and BOR and the South Fork Watershed Council, to see all that come together. And also, made some good progress on work that we have upcoming and planned for 24 and 25. So excited for the work that's yet to come.
Great, thanks, Stefan. South Fork John Day Watershed Council.
Yes, hi everyone, Hannah Latzo with the South Fork Johnny Watershed Council, project manager. As Stefan just mentioned, our biggest accomplishment was was Murders Creek, finishing the Murders Creek restoration project on the ODFW wildlife area. Big shout out to the ODFW district fish biologists and the habitat program and the screen shop and BOR and also the wildlife area crew. We could not have done it without you. That project was 2.5 miles along Murders Creek, putting in BDAs and large wood, taking out some of the pretty large berms and riprap, and more to come on that. We're hoping that we can do a tour in the springtime for all of our partners to come out and see the awesome work that's going on down there. So that's our biggest accomplishment.
I wanted to jump on too. This is Amy Steiner from the South Fork Johnny Watershed Council, and just commend Hannah for her work on that project. She's been put that application in the first year she started with us, and so it's been going on about 6 years that she's been trying to get that project underway, and it finally got to happen this year, so pretty exciting.
Thanks, Hannah and Amy. Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Yeah, this is Jeremy Henderson with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. I think our biggest accomplishment this year was Lindsay Ciapella secured a grant to get a graduate student to study smallmouth bass and steelhead interactions in 30 Mile Creek. And so that work is ongoing, but preliminary findings are that smallmouth bass eat a lot of steelhead. So, yep, that's our biggest accomplishment.
And then we'll also do, does the district or the screens have any accomplishments they want to talk about?
Yeah, on the district side, of course, I was going to use Hannah's example of Murders Creek, but she stole my thunder. Thanks, Hannah. I would like to just highlight the fact that we have new staff managing our habitat program, and it's coming together very nicely. I think as a collaborative, we're working with the Screen Shop on a lot of partner projects where there's passage involved or screening as well as habitat. And we're still doing fences. Riparian fences is still within the scope of work that we're going to be doing, and we're going to be doing more of those in the coming years. But I'm pretty excited to have someone in place that's managing that program that can do habitat, in-stream habitat type work, and we're working towards getting a Mini X and other equipment to really be well poised to be a good partner for in-stream habitat work with all of you. So that's what I'm looking forward to, and that's what I'm happy about, that we're moving towards that direction.
Great, thank you.
This is Mike Jensen with the Screens program. So probably our biggest accomplishments were we've screened 3 unscreened diversions this year. One had been taking us more than 10 years to accomplish, so we did finish that this year. So that's pretty much our biggest accomplishments.
Thanks. Oregon Department of Agriculture.
I don't think Maria is on.
Okay. U.S. Forest Service.
And we'll just go by the list. So Malheur, Umatilla, and then Wallowa Whitman. So we'll start with the Malheur.
Hey there, Cody here. So I guess some of our greatest accomplishments, we finished up 3 projects that kind of been going on for a few years now. One being our Butte Ruby Beaver project, finished up the remaining action items on Butte Creek, and that was overall like a 2.7 mile of in-stream restoration on those 3 streams, and then kind of finished up some exclosures on Camp Creek and then planting on Big Creek within some exclosures. And another exciting project that we have going on is doing some buck and pole fencing prior to in-stream restoration work that we haven't really done in the past. So kind of see how vegetation is set up for the in-stream restoration, what that looks like going into it. Thanks.
Well, this is Doug McKay. I'm the district ranger out of Heppner on the Umatilla National Forest, and I don't think I have any counterparts from the Norfolk John Day Ranger District, so I'll be speaking for both of us. This last year, we accomplished about 9,000 acres, a little over 9,000 acres of fuels treatments through prescribed burning to help with restoration. And then in addition to that, we have several AOP projects that are moving forward. I'll let Susan Thace, our botanist, speak about one of them at Kelly Prairie here in just a second. But we have multiple projects that are at varying stages of completion, NEPA projects, planning projects that cover about 250,000 acres. So we hope to get to signature on those in the next year or two. So the most recent is a joint partnership called 54 North that is going to be facilitated through GNA with ODF, and then the CTUIR has expressed interest in partnering with First Foods Restoration. So there'll be varying opportunities to comment on project design and to partner with us in the future. This will guide restoration. These projects will guide restoration in these watersheds for the next 10, 15 years. So Seuss, do you want to talk about Kelly Prairie?
Sure. Hi, I'm Seuss Thies, the South Zone botanist on the Umatilla. I joined this position just last year. And I do want to say thanks to Trout Unlimited and C2AR with their help this year over on the North Fork John Day District with some great low tech process-based restoration projects, but I'll let them describe those. And we are in the process of planning restoration for Kelly Prairie, which is Heppner Ranger District's largest wet meadow. There are 3 undersized AOPs we're looking to design an upsizing for, and overall increasing the lateral hydrological connectivity of that wet meadow to protect some great camas populations and other wetland plants that are known western bumblebee populations are nesting at. So yeah, actually, Sue Greer and I took a field trip there last fall, and she was really, really excited about it and recommended reaching out to this partnership. I feel like it would align very well, but I'll pass it on.
I was muted. Anyone from Wallowa Whitman? Okay. Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation.
John Zach, we have a dual largest project, greatest accomplishment. Bull Run Creek Line Tail Restoration Phase 1 was completed, and we knocked out Desolation Reach 3, except for road removal we need to take care of and some plantings.
Thank you. Blue Mountain Land Trust.
Marty's out of town.
Okay, thanks. Monument SWCD.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello, everyone. This is Eric from Monument Soil and Water. 2023 was a big capacity building year for us. We are fully staffed and spent 2023 planning and funding projects for 2024. So I'd say our greatest accomplishment this year is sort of organizational capacity, and we're excited for our projects that are planned for next year. Thank you.
Great, thank you. BLM, Bureau of Land Management. Anybody? Nobody. Okay. Grant SWCD. I know there's somebody from Grant SWCD. I saw somebody.
They had to sign up early.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Bureau of Reclamation.
Hi, that's Mark Krogan, Bureau of Reclamation. I guess one of my bigger accomplishments, based on the earlier conversation with the 1200C, is I survived going through the 1200C process on the Murders Creek project. It's quite an ordeal, and I wish everybody the best of luck getting through it on future projects. But in reality, I had the privilege of working with Hannah with the South Fork Watershed Council and ODF&W on the Murders Creek project, and that's definitely the biggest accomplishment for the year. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Mid John Day Watershed Council.
I would say our biggest accomplishment is I think we have everybody updated with the new name, all the, T's are crossed and I's are dotted. New contact information. It's kind of funny how many little pieces, even within the same organization, like OWEB, you have to update that information. But, with the name change and address change and everything that we had last year, I think, fingers crossed, that we're through all of those hurdles.
Great, thank you. Let's see. Morrow SWCD. Anybody? No? Okay, Burns Paiute Tribe. Okay, Sherman SWCD. Wow, we're gonna have leftover time. Bonneville Power Administration. Wheeler SWCD.
Hi, this is Cassie, the district manager for Wheeler. And our biggest accomplishment would be the award of the Wood Innovation Grant and the undergoing of getting a facility design underway. We're almost finished with it. And if anybody wants to check out the promoting video, it's up on our website and our Facebook.
Would you like to drop a link in the chat so we can?
I sure can.
Great,
Yeah.
thanks, Cassie. Let's see, Gilliam East John Day Watershed Council.
Not in today.
Thanks, Herb. Where was I? Oh, Sustainable Northwest. Oregon State Parks. National Resource Conservation Service. Blue Mountains Forest Partners. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Trout on, oh, sorry, was someone talking? No. Trout Unlimited. Oregon
Hi,
Department.
everybody. This is Noel March with Trout Unlimited. And this year we completed another year of low-tech restoration in several North Fork John Day tributaries. And that's been an ongoing partnership with the Umatilla tribes and the Umatilla National Forest. And our biggest accomplishment was on North Fork Cable Creek this year. We discovered that beavers have now taken over a good portion of this project area, which has been one of our ongoing project sites that we've been to for a couple of treatments now. And upwards of a quarter mile of the project site has been pretty much completely taken over by a massive beaver complex and a huge network of multi-threaded channels, which all of that occurred basically just in the last year. So it's been really impressive to watch. And we're taking a hands-off approach to that portion of the project now and just observing what the beavers are doing, because so far they're putting our BDAs to shame and burying them under lots of material. So we're just taking a hands-off approach and watching what they do next. Thanks.
And then I think Jesse was trying to talk.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I was not able to mute. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. Jesse Wilson, Bonneville Power Administration. One of our biggest accomplishment is continued funding of all the great work that the partners do out there. I think from a habitat perspective, Murderers Creek, Desolation Creek, Reach 3, Bull Run Creek, continued screening, riparian protection, and continued habitat passage and design. All the work that you all are doing out there is, something that we're seeing and tracking, and really appreciate your efforts. Our biggest accomplishment probably internally is getting new COR support staff for the John Day. So you have some consistency and representation and someone who knows what's going out. So Alan Whiting, we were able to bring him on this summer, and he's going to be working closely with me in the John Day. I did also want to put a plug in for the local QLE. I was really happy to see the FEMCA and the water transactions folks here. I've been working really closely with them. That Deschutes River photo that she showed, I was actually out there on the site tour. We're really working to align our water transactions with our habitat funding there in the Deschutes Basin to make sure that benefits are realized where we've got habitat work in really water limited systems. Working really closely internally with our water transaction program. And I think one of the big limiting factors in the John Day is the fact that we don't have a local QLE. So hopefully some of you folks took that to heart. And if you have any questions or want to talk about that further, I'd be happy to chat with you as well. But yeah, just appreciate all the work you all are doing out there. Thanks.
Thank you, Jesse. And do we have anyone from the Oregon Department of Forestry here? No? Okay, well, happy retirement, Mark. That's exciting, a new chapter. And thank you all for sharing. It sounds like it was a really amazing year, and thanks for everything that you do. There's a lot of great accomplishments. So I'm going to pass it over to Hannah.
Hey,
Oh, yeah.
Marika, we were at the bottom of the screen. I think we got scrolled over.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Sorry,
No
Brian,
worries.
go ahead.
I had my little speech all rehearsed, so
I'm so sorry, Brian. Oh my goodness. Okay, go.
No, you're
please.
good. This is Brian Kelly, Executive Director with the Ritter Land Management Team. We were pretty excited this year to follow up on a stream survey that we did in the Ritter area. And we are embarking on a project on 6 Mile Creek, a tributary of the Middle Fork. And we have 4 enthusiastic landowners that have signed on, and we're going to do in the ballpark of 4 miles of restoration on 6 Mile Creek. Great thanks to the North Fork John Day Watershed Council for writing an epic grant to OWEB that we were successful in getting. And thanks to all the agency partners that came out and walked 6 Mile Creek with us. I will try not to list you all because I'm sure I'll forget somebody, but thanks to all of our partners.
Thanks so much, Brian. Is there anybody else that I missed over? Didn't get a chance. Okay, Hannah.
Yes, thank you everyone for those accomplishments for the year. It's really exciting to see all of the work that all of our partners are doing. Like I said, please let us know if you are not getting any of our emails or invitations for the next 2024 invites. You can just email the coordinator or my South Fork email, and we can get you added to the list. Our next meeting will be February 14th, which will also be virtual. And we already have some talks in the works. I think we will be doing a draft presentation on the uplands prioritization. So that's something to look forward to in February.